It's funny that the religious are convinced that they've got all the good answers for every single question that they get asked. Just ask them. They'll tell you so. Of course, they never bother to run it past the people asking the questions, do they? So let's see Frank Turek's take on all of this coming up next. We're back with Frank Turek, and he's still convinced, for dishonest reasons, that everything coming out of his mouth is the gospel truth, so to speak. If you don't do exactly what he says, if you don't act exactly as he acts, then there's something wrong with you. Never mind that the things he says are absurd, and the things that he does are asinine. It makes people feel good, so you'd better get to work. But what does Frank say when a question comes up from one of his deluded followers? Let's find out.
Why does a skeptic still choose to not believe in God if they say all their belief questions are answered?
Who the hell says that? If all of my quote-unquote belief questions were answered to my satisfaction, I'd go where the evidence led, and if that happened to lead to Christianity, then I'd accept the tenets of Christianity. That doesn't necessarily mean that I'd be a Christian, but I'd certainly believe in God if that's what the evidence showed was most likely true. The problem is, it isn't. None of my quote-unquote belief questions have been answered. In fact, the religious simply refuse to address my questions rationally, period. Questions like, how in the hell do you actually know any of the things that you claim to know? And faith isn't an answer. So whoever these mythical skeptics that he's talking about are, I'd really love to meet them. I don't really think they exist. But let's see what Frank has to say.
Why does a skeptic choose not to believe in God after he gets his questions answered?
Yes, that's what they say.
Well, I think the problem quite frequently isn't here, it's here. That's why that survey we just did discovered that most people aren't really interested in pursuing God.
Yeah. So it's all a huge conspiracy. Gotcha, Frank. You know how I talk about bald rationalizations? There's a perfect example. Most people, an ever-increasing number of people these days, simply aren't interested in the crap that Frank and his ilk are peddling. Now, I would suspect the reason for that is because most people recognize that the garbage coming out of Frank's mouth is unsupportable and unjustifiable nonsense. But hey, I haven't done a highly scientific study like Frank apparently thinks he has. Regardless, it is a demonstrable fact that more people are leaving the faith than are joining in. And Frank can't accept that the reason they're leaving, if indeed they are leaving for this reason, is because they recognize that the crap Frank peddles stinks. No, he has to come up with another explanation, and it can't be the failure of his beliefs.
They want to pursue their own desires, and that includes suppressing the truth about God, going their own way.
And that's a completely empty claim until you're able to back it up. But that's the thing. It's why my belief questions never get answered, because I don't accept empty claims as legitimate answers. I don't care what Frank claims. Anyone can claim anything they want. A book can make whatever claims it wants to make. Claims are not facts, and I only care about facts. I care about being able to take the claims and back them up with some objectively verifiable kind of evidence. And that's something Frank and his side simply don't have. And they know they don't have it. They like to pretend, but they can't be so stupid as to think that they have things that they simply lack. It's why Every time you ask them for direct and demonstrable evidence, they hem and they haw and they make excuses for why they can't just present that evidence that they seem convinced they actually have. Because they know they have no evidence. It's a con job. If they had that evidence, they could just give it to you when you asked. Here you go, everything you asked for. Hey, let me know if you need anything else. But they don't do that. Instead, they make excuses and bald rationalizations for why they can't actually do anything that you'd expect them to be able to do. Now, where did I put that evidence? It was just here. I'll have to look around and get back to you. And of course they never do. Funny how that works, isn't it?
No, some people are trying to seek God. We get that. And God is seeking everyone, and only some people respond. But that's why I asked the question, Venus, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian?
Hey now, let's not get ahead of ourselves. If Christianity was true, would I believe the demonstrably true things that Christianity teaches? Absolutely I would. But that's not all that Christianity entails. Christianity also requires that you worship things and perform rituals and engage in religious practices that go beyond what he'd like to think is demonstrably true. Those are not things that I would be willing to engage in without a very good reason to do so. And that reason is not because God will get you if you don't. In fact, that's a good reason to reject all of these extraneous, nonsensical ideas because God is a douchebag. This is a multi-part question. First, it requires that Christians prove with objective evidence that the claims that they are making are rationally valid to be accepted as truth. Second, and this only matters once the first part is done, they'd have to prove that their God is actually deserving of my worship and adoration. And guess what? They've done neither one. They haven't even tried. Imagine that.
In fact, you ask that question to try and discover if the person's open. You ever having a conversation with somebody and they bring up an objection and you begin to answer it, and before you're done answering the objection, they're on to the next objection?
Yes.
Yeah, that person's not open.
No, your answers simply are not sufficient to take them seriously. Because here's the thing. If you're trying to convince someone that something you believe is valid, it doesn't matter how convinced you are. It matters if what you say convinces the other person. That you are convinced, that only works for you. It doesn't necessarily do anything for anyone else. So if people are not convinced by what you have to say, then you need to step back and ask yourself what you are doing wrong. Because it is almost certainly your fault. Either you're presenting the information poorly, or maybe, just maybe, your beliefs are unjustified and you ought to stop believing it yourself. Certainly, there can be people who are simply not interested or who are rejecting it for other reasons. That's completely fine. But if most people look at you like you're crazy, as seems to be the implication of so many of these apologetic channels on YouTube, then maybe, just maybe, you're crazy. And that's not something these people want to consider.
That person's just trying to validate their own worldview and trying to throw everything they can at you to try and befuddle you, because they're not really interested in your answer. They just want to bring up another objection and make themselves feel better.
Yes.
Who do we know that does exactly that? I wonder. Let me think. Oh, right. It's Christians, because their entire belief system is based around making themselves feel better. It's not about pursuing the evidence to the most logical and rational conclusion. It's about getting a chemical hit in the brain that makes them feel warm and fuzzy. How can Frank continue to get all of that so completely wrong? Well, look at who he's talking to. He's pandering so that they keep coming to see him and keep giving him money. I trust that we're not surprised. Because really, that's all that's going on. It's the sum total of Christian apologetics, and it goes for all religions if you think about it. Apologists pandering to their meal ticket for money and support in exchange for pretty words and an ad hoc rationalization that supports their pre-existing beliefs. This isn't like a legitimate teacher who is only passing on demonstrably true and objectively supportable information to those eager to learn the facts. It's a scam artist trying to make a buck off the backs of the gullible and easily swayed. Tell the people what they want to hear, even if it isn't true. And Frank has his little nuggets of stupidity that he pulls out at a moment's notice, even though they've been soundly debunked, because he knows that the people in the audience aren't smart enough to think about it for themselves. Dumb people, dishonest shysters, and wishful thinking. It all adds up to religious apologetics. Too bad most of us are actually honest. Otherwise, hey, we'd all be rich. Lying for a buck is a time-honored tradition among the religious. I'm not sure why that surprises anyone.
Bum